There's a story we've been told about self-kindness, that it's the soft part of healing, like the optional bit that we do once we've done all the really hard stuff, like the therapy and the trauma release and the deep stuff. A bit like kindness is the sprinkle on top once you've earned it. But I want to challenge that today because self-kindness isn't the soft part of healing. It's not the cherry on top. It's like the soil. And without it, nothing else you do is actually going to take root. So this isn't a philosophical position, it's a neurological one. Your nervous system physically cannot heal in the environment that self-criticism creates. And if you've inherited trauma or lived through your own, that internal environment has likely been very hostile for a very long time. So today we're on K of the A to Z of somatic healing, and I'm making the case that kindness isn't softness, it's structural. So hi, if you've not met before, my name is Mercedes and I work in somatic healing and yoga, and I've been doing that for nearly 15 years now. And I am doing my own healing as well. I'm sharing from that perspective so that you can see what it's like in real life as well. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why self-kindness is a neurological requirement rather than an optional extra, and what self-criticism is actually doing to your nervous system that's already carrying trauma, and how to start practicing kindness in a way your body can actually register. So that's the intro done. Let's crack on with it. Now, somewhere along the line, we kind of conflated kindness with weakness. And we maybe saw it as an indulgence or letting yourself off the hook. And you see it quite often where we talk, there's quite a lot of negative language about this kind of way of being, where maybe we're being a bit too soft, we're being a bit too kind, and we're just being too nice to ourselves. And we've been sold the idea that hardness is what creates change and discipline is what we need, and that's how we really get there. We need that tough love, we need the accountability. And then when we're soft and we're kind, that's what keeps us stuck and that's what stops us moving forward. And the healing culture sometimes reinforces this. So we want the dramatic breakthroughs, the cathartic releases, and that all comes from the hard work narrative. And kindness almost gets relegated to the self-care aisle. Like, when we get around to our self-care, then we'll do a bit of kindness. But this framing kind of comes from a particular area and one that doesn't take the nervous system into account. And we all know that when we try and heal from the brain down, it's much harder than when we try and do it from the body up. And kindness is kind of like the basis of that body up work. And so we actually want that first because that's like the soil of our healing. When we can get that kindness in place, we can allow everything else to heal all the way up. And so that's what we're going to be discussing today. So your nervous system can't distinguish between an external threat and an internal one. So when we have that harsh internal voice, it will activate the same stress response as someone else criticizing us or something external that is a threat to us. So that's what we're actually doing every time we are being critical to ourselves. Every time we're insisting that we push through, or we're insisting we have more discipline, or we're pushing that big breakthrough, we're actually dysregulating our nervous system. And when we do that, what happens is it ramps up our cortisol. Our sympathetic nervous system is activated. So essentially we go into the fight or flight. That sees our heart rate go up, our breathing gets shallow, and so we're really activated. And when we have chronic self-criticism, it can keep us in the low-grade sympathetic activation. So just a little bit of fight or flight kind of sitting there. So cortisol just dripping out through the system. And that actually tells us that we're not okay, and that can delay our healing. But it also can add more layers of trauma on top and more stress on top. And it means that when we come to do that harder work, it's much harder for us to open up and to actually do it because we're already dysregulated and we're already triggered and we're already not giving ourselves that support and kindness that we actually really need. And healing is an actual nervous system repair. So we release a bit of trauma, then we integrate it, and we release a bit more and we integrate it and we regulate it. And that all happens when we're in the parasympathetic state, so in more of the rest and digest part of our nervous system. And that's when we can feel safe and connected. So it's even further up. So once we get through that rest and digest and we get up into safe and connected, then we're really going to allow ourselves to heal. But that takes a lot of kindness and a lot of self-understanding and a lot of appreciation for who we actually are. So you physically can't access that state of that calm and connected or rest and digest and however you like to think of it. You can't access it if your nervous system feels like it's under attack. And that self-criticism is putting it under attack. And so we can't get into that state to be able to enable healing to actually happen. And it's why when you try and do your healing, you feel like nothing really sits in the body or it doesn't work or it doesn't stick with you. It's because we're doing it from a dysregulated state and we're not allowing ourselves that compassion and that kindness for everything that we've been through before we even begin the healing. Because the body cannot repair while it's defending itself from itself, essentially. And that's kind of not just something that we're kind of coming up with. It's biology. We just can't do it if our nervous system is dysregulated. So we have to bring that kindness in. Now, if you have a trauma history, and that could be a capital T or little t trauma, whichever type of trauma you actually have, and that may be your own trauma or it may be stuff that you've inherited through your family and that you're processing. But your nervous system is already primed towards threat detection because of all the trauma that you're carrying. And so your baseline activation is already higher. And when we add self-criticism into the mix, that baseline will keep us in chronic survival mode. And so we're kind of stuck there all the time. And the system never gets the chance to properly come down and relax. And this is something I've been working on quite a lot over recent years because I've experienced quite a lot of trauma and I'm carrying quite a bit of generational trauma as well. And that kind of what I'm carrying through has kept me very much activated. And also having ADHD means that I'm much more likely to be activated as well. So I've got trauma and ADHD, which are piling on top of each other, causing low grade activation. And then those things are actually making it more likely for me to then criticize myself because especially with ADHD, I've heard more criticism. So I'm used to experiencing criticism. And so I can lump that on a little bit as well. And so then I'm keeping myself constantly activated. So kindness is one of the things that I've been working on really, really hard to allow myself that space, to allow myself the time to heal and to do things like allow myself to rest, give myself that kindness, to take more time, to not have to push through all of the time. And so all of these nervous system patterns that you might be carrying, that I'm carrying, kind of will keep us in that state. So especially when we think about inherited trauma. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that because I've got some as well. And the nervous system patterns that you carry through that, they weren't all formed from your own experiences. And some of them were passed down. And epigenetic research is now showing us that trauma can be transmitted across generations and it shapes how our nervous system responds. So things that maybe our mum's experienced, extreme trauma, we will have nervous system reactions to things that trigger that trauma, even though we may not have experienced it ourselves. And so then that can add on to what then happens to us as well in our lives. And so often we can assume that harsh inner voice was just you, but it may even be coming down from the inherited trauma. Or it may just be internalized criticism from a parent or a grandparent or culture or everything that we've picked up over time. And it may actually not be your natural voice anyway, but it's something that we've started to lean on as, well, this is just how I talk to myself. And it's important to know that because it changes how we work with ourselves. Because you're not just up against your own habit, you're up against generational wiring and all of the things that go with that. So that means that kindness has to be deeper than just affirmations. It has to be a structural reorganization of our internal environment. So what does that really mean? It means we have to start thinking about everything that we do, how we change our language and our self-talk towards kindness and self-compassion and away from self-criticism. And so we can actually work quite hard on doing that. And then our regulation practices hit more. And then our healing happens more quickly because we layer all of these things on. And so that's where we really need to think about how we talk to ourselves and how we can shift that. So some of the things that you can do to practice is your tone will matter more than your content to some degree. So your body reads how you speak to yourself before it reads what you're saying. And so if we can learn to speak to ourselves in a soft tone, then even if we have something strong to say, it can land differently than if we're talking at ourselves with a sharp tone, even if what we're saying is positive. So it's that tone that we have of the way that we interact with our self-talk. And we can do things like placing a hand on our heart when we notice that where there is self-criticism coming up. And we can just connect with that and realize that actually we're okay and we don't necessarily need to listen to what is coming out in our self-talk. And we can also begin to speak to the part of us that is struggling and not the situation. So this becomes down to the difference between shame and guilt. So shame is when we do something, when we're experiencing life and we turn that into a reflection of who we actually are. So we will then, if we forget to do something, rather than just saying, well, do you know what, I'm sorry, I forgot to do that, we will then turn that whole story internally into, I'm a bad person because I forgot to do that. And that's how we then start speaking to ourselves as we are responsible for everything, because it's part of our identity. And we need to become aware of that talk of when we identify with actions and actually start to talk to the action rather than our identity. And we can also begin to give ourselves permission for how we feel, and permission for, if we're being kind to ourselves, if that feels uncomfortable, to acknowledge that it feels uncomfortable and to stay with it, to stick with it and to appreciate how that actually does feel and thank ourselves for the attempt to be kind to ourselves. And start to notice when that resistance shows up, how it's showing up. Where does that show up in the body? So when we're being kind to ourselves, what shows up in the body? Like, do we get a clenching in our stomach? Or do we feel a tightness in our chest? Or does our jaw get sort of like tight and clenched? Or do our shoulders come up? Like, tune into those bits of the body. What happens when we offer ourselves kindness? And can we allow ourselves to release some of that and come back into a more regulated state? And start with small bits, start with small amounts of kindness, build up and let the nervous system learn the new patterns of self-kindness rather than self-criticism. And just remember that every time that you choose kindness over criticism, you're not being indulgent. You're changing your physiology and you're creating the conditions for healing to actually take root. You're doing the work, possibly the most important work that there is. And so if you can tell yourself that, then you know that what you're doing is of benefit to you. So if this video resonated with you, please like and subscribe because it really helps me reach more women who need this work. And if you want to keep going deeper with the A to Z of somatic healing and be part of a community that's actually practicing this stuff together, I've got a free community on School called the Somatic Reset Lab. I'll drop the link in the description and I'd love to see you on the inside.